Okay. All right. Okay. Hi, I'm Emma Johnson. I am with Moms for Shared Parenting. And today I am with Matt Hale. And if you are involved in the shared parenting community, activist community at all, you definitely know Matt in Kentucky because in 2017, Kentucky became really the first state in the United States to have a really strong, equally shared parenting law where there's a rebuttable presumption of equally shared parenting. And Matt and I have gotten to know each other as friends over the years. And we're constantly in the activist community. I know we're talking about Kentucky all the time because it is such a great law. It's all the early data suggests that it's been a success. I'll let you tell me, but I'm not hearing any pushback now. It just seems like it is was such an elegant process. And I'm sure it's probably a little bumpier than that, but I thought it'd be so helpful. And also I want to know myself. I have a lot, we've talked over the years, but I want to know myself. And I want to we all want to know how did you do it? Just the nuts and bolts of how did it happen? Because there's such a vibrant and large shared parenting activist community in the United States and around the world. And people are doing all kinds of things and frankly, not always getting a lot of traction, but you hit it. So thank you for being here.
Well, first of all, Emma, I'd like to say thank you to you. I mean, you have really spread the message out there for shared parenting. You've brought a lot of energy into it. You've used you've come from an angle of talking about moms and the benefits to moms, and I think that's wonderful. I mean, we hear so much about dads, and people need to realize that shared parenting is good for parents of both genders and children of both genders. And I think you really bring that energy to the movement.
I really appreciate that. There's a place for all the voices, right? There's a place, I really believe that. And I just coming from my media background, I know we need female voices, we need male voices, we need white voices, we need voices of color, conservative, liberal, because there's so many people this affects. This is like such a broad issue. So the more thoughtful, yes.
And there's support for all genders, all races, all religions. Everyone, the majority of basically every subgroup, support shared parenting. But it's interesting because your statements about, how did you do it, and it just, all those perceptions that people have of what actually happened in Kentucky are a little different because people saw the success. They've heard about the success. What they didn't hear about was the years of failure.
Okay.
And it took a while. I started the process in 2012, and I failed. I failed miserably. I failed embarrassingly. And I think the shared parenting supporters need to hear that because a lot of people get frustrated. They think, oh, I'm not having any luck. Well, it takes a while. You have to establish relationships. You've got to overcome objections, and you've got to find allies. And that takes a while. And in 2017, Kentucky became actually the second state to have temporary orders, shared parenting and temporary orders. And it was a presumption, and Alaska was the first. House Bill 492 in Kentucky created a presumption for that. And the way that we did it was that we thought it would be good to take a smaller step first. We thought that an incremental approach would work better. Rather than going in and changing every law in the books in Kentucky, we wanted to change the temporary law. And that's the law that affects people while they're going through a divorce or separation. And the lawmakers were welcome to the idea. The basic argument for temporary orders is the reason you have them is because a judge doesn't have time to review all the facts and make a decision. So if the judge doesn't have time to review all the facts and make a decision, how can they pick a winner and how can they pick a loser for shared parenting? They don't have time. So the starting point for temporary orders should be shared parenting. Well, after that law passed, it was clear that it was popular with constituents. That law passed unanimously in the House and unanimously in the Senate. And then in 2018, we went for the full-blown shared parenting presumption in new cases and permanent orders.
But it's so smart. The temporary thing is so smart because so much of our parenting culture in this country, when parents separate or divorce, it's always like, well, what was the relationship like or the parenting situation like before the breakup, right? one parent was a prime, right? And then all of a sudden we have established that for the rest of that family, it's going to try to mirror exactly what the parenting split was while they were living in the same house. I mean, which is just dumb because we we want to change what was happening in the house. It was two people that hated each other and it wasn't working. So we needed to, anyways, but it's very interesting. You just nipped that in the bud. So while on one hand, I can see how it's politically strategic, you kind of you spoon fed them like a baby version of what you really wanted long-term, right? With this temporary order bill and law.
And let them try it out.
Yeah, to have them
And
try
let
it
the
out.
state try it out.
But you're also establishing something very important because we know anybody that's gone through this process, whatever that initial agreement is, whether you choose it as the couple, the parents, or a judge chooses it for you, or you feel pressured into signing an agreement, whatever's established on the onset is going to set a really powerful precedence for the rest of your co-parenting relationship. So it was a very important move.
Right, status quo matters.
Status quo, yeah, very eloquently said. Well, let's just tell this all the way back. So one of the things that I think is very powerful about your story, well, one, you're a guy.
Last time I checked.
pronoun question aside, you're not an organization. You didn't set up a big organization. We know you as Matt Hale. They got the shared parenting, right? That was your strategy was to operate as yourself, opposed to try to build a large organization.
Well, right. Well, I am and I have been allied with the National Parents Organization, but the push to get the shared parenting law, I didn't reach out for a lot of resources from a lot of people. I really initially I had failed so many times in so many different ways, and found that trying to build a really complex, heavily populated organization at the state level didn't really help me. And in fact, it kind of hurt. And when I got the 2017 law passed and when I went to testify on it, there was just Dr. Schroeder in National Parents Organizations, Dr. Ryan Schroeder. He and I were the only people who testified on it. And I brought a few people in the crowd who were just a couple of members of my family and a couple of friends. I didn't want a lot of people getting involved at that point because it had been a long process, and I felt confident that the bill was going to pass. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want people getting involved and then complicating things. People, saying a lot of bombastic things that can cause difficulties for lawmakers, or to, threaten lawmakers with, if you don't vote for this, we're going to, try to run against you, or, just that kind of negative messaging. I wanted to continue our messaging, which was on a message of love and hope, and just coming from a positive way. And you might notice that when I talk about things, I'll often, say the start of a speech or testifying, I'll say, what a great day, just because I want people to know that this is not a movement of angry parents. This is a movement of joy and happiness. And, getting shared parenting for children so that children can see both their parents is a wonderful thing. It's a thing to be celebrated. And also when I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit and talk a little bit more about joy. And that is when we got shared parenting day, or when we got the shared parenting law passed, it proved incredibly popular. And maybe I'm jumping ahead to a question.
No, let's hear it.
We wanted to make sure that Kentucky's law could spread to other states. And the first step in doing that was we needed to show that it didn't just pass in a vacuum, that it was popular. And we immediately polled it. The National Parents Organization polled the law immediately. And once that happened, we saw that it was supported by a factor of about 6-1. And we started telling the lawmakers that. And then when the election happened shortly after that, people were boggled, their minds were boggled by how powerfully the law spoke for the lawmakers. The sponsors all won. The yes votes won 90% of the time, and those who were against it, there were only a couple, didn't do very well. In fact, we had one person at a 40-point swing for no real reason that we can see, other than the fact that she voted against the shared parenting law.
Interesting. That's so interesting. Okay, but let's just dial this way back, because like you said, so one of the reasons that I suspect that you have been so successful in this is that you are outside you are removed from this topic, the subject of the separated dad, because your story, it's not that you as a dad are an immediate right now victim of this lousy judicial system, right? You're coming at it. Tell us a little bit about where your passion comes from this and where you are right now with your family.
Right. Well, thank you. Well, my background is I was raised by a single mom. I saw how hard it was on my mom to raise, in our case, three sons. And I saw the struggles that she had, and she did an amazing job. She's an amazing woman. But it's a little overwhelming for one parent to raise three children without support or almost no support from the other parent. And when I went through my divorce many years ago, I ended up with shared parenting, and it's been great. And my children have really done well. I mean, nobody's perfect, but things have gone pretty well. And I compare that to how I grew up, and I just think, my goodness, every family should have the opportunity to have shared parenting if both the parents are healthy.
Hmm.
And so I talked to some friends who were going through this back in 2012, and they were struggling to get shared parenting. And I said, standing in this very office that I'm in right now, I said, I'm going to see what I can do to change that. And I downloaded Kentucky's law and changed some words in the temporary law and began working. And I think
So
it makes
I
a
want
big
you to
deal.
tell me what happens next. I really want to hear about the nuts and bolts of this. But I do want to underscore this. When you say you come at this with a message of love, it's not like you're just blowing a bunch of sunshine up the legislators' asses. I feel this from you, right? It is, you tell the story with a lot of empathy about your family of origin, your parents, right? And respect for your mother, a woman. And it sounds like you are coming at this with, it's a success story. And maybe you're lucky, or maybe you have legal resources that other men don't. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. But you did come to your divorce and your parenting schedule in a healthy way. And I think that is so critical, because most people that I'm meeting in the movement are coming from it from a place of trauma, right? They have been lost their kids, just really horrible, sad stories. But that's a hard thing to hear. That's a hard place to come from when you're trying to get work done, because it becomes about your story and your pain, and it can very quickly cloud your effectiveness.
Absolutely. And it's hard for people to overcome that pain and put the energy into a positive place. But joining the shared parenting movement and doing so in a way that's positive and full of joy is a way to channel that anger and turn it into energy. And that helps.
Mhm.
I didn't have that challenge. And I've said many times, Emma, about people who face that, who come from such a dark place, but they step out of their lives and they go and they try to change laws, and they try to do it in a loving way. I call them heroes. And I called the Kentucky heroes, the people who helped us, who joined in along the way, who faced that anger. I called them the Kentucky heroes because they are. Now, when you talked earlier about why did I not go out and broadcast to everyone what was going on in 2017, that's because some people aren't able to overcome that anger, and that's unfortunate. And I think we all understand that we've all had points in our lives where we've had a difficult time overcoming anger. But if you're not in a place to do that, and when you're talking to a lawmaker, if you're not in a place to overcome that anger and to talk about things in the terms of joy and love and happiness, you're not going to be an effective lobbyist. And it was very easy for me to talk to the lawmakers and say, how do I know that shared parenting works? I've lived it. And I've
Mhm.
also lived the opposite. And I can tell you by comparing the two, it ain't even close.
Yeah, I've heard, interesting. I recently testified at a Georgia committee hearing, and one of the most compelling testimonies I heard was the sponsor. It was a young woman, and she was in her like 30s, young woman to me. And she was very interesting. She was a child of a divorced family, and she said, the judge, I mean, this was decades before at that point, the judge had given my parents like the, Friday night special every other weekend deal to my dad, but organically, and just her telling about how organically her parents just kind of worked something else out, where the dad was very much involved, and how she benefited from that. that just to me it came from a place of authority because it was success. We saw the success story, right?
Right.
And it works. I mean, this is just a marketing problem. It's not about what's right or wrong. All those horror stories need to be validated in some way, but they just don't work. They just don't work. You know, that just doesn't move the needle, whether you're selling sneakers or you're selling a bill.
No, you're right. Absolutely. And lawmakers, they hear problems all day long, every day. They
Mhm.
hear things that need to be fixed all the time. But how often do they have the answer handed to them? I mean,
Mhm.
shared parenting is
Yeah.
one of the
And it
easiest
doesn't
sells there
cost
is.
any money. They don't have to come up with
Right.
budget for it.
That's right. Um, this is a movement that helps. That it couldn't be an easier sell. It helps children. It's good for parents. It's good for men. It's good for women. It makes things easier in the court system. We've seen the stats from the administrative office of the courts here in Kentucky that after the shared parenting law, the number of disputed divorces went down, that domestic violence went down
Double
because
digits. Mhm.
absolutely, when you stop making parents fight for one to be a winner and one to be a loser, they fight less. It's simple logic, and we're seeing that. And what's happening too, Emma, is the power of Kentucky's statement to the nation on shared parenting is being spread everywhere. You mentioned Georgia. Well, Dr. Ryan Schroeder, his testimony and research was cited there. I know that you've also been working in South Dakota and
Mhm.
testified there. And there's a lawmaker up there. I think his name's Tom Paschke. He has talked about Kentucky and the effects
I
there.
say it's all over the place. I just wrote a book proposal that's going to the publisher right now. You guys are in there. You guys are everywhere. Like I'm spreading the gospel of Kentucky. And P.S. a random aside, my long-term boyfriend is from Glasgow, Kentucky, so I go to Kentucky all the time.
That's hey, welcome. Come and visit anytime.
Um, but interesting. I've been and just trying to learn about activism in general because I'm kind of a baby policy person. I'm trying to learn the ropes, and I've been really studying a lot about gay marriage because I feel like it's a very relevant sort of. There's a lot of parallels, and there's been a lot written about. There was a pivot in the gay rights movement in the 90s when up until that point for decades the movement had been focused on policy and money, so right and human rights. So gay couples would lose out, for example, on tax disadvantages or estate planning and all of these things because did not have the right to legally marry, and therefore they were at a disadvantage if one partner was in the hospital. There was no power of attorney that could be administered, all of these things. And then the movement lost Proposition 8 in California, and it was devastating. They just lost big time. But then they did a pivot, and they pivoted and they stopped talking about policy and victimhood, and they started talking about love. They started celebrating the love, and they celebrated the love of couples. They did media messaging around from relatives of people who are gay, because we all know somebody who's gay, and almost all of them are really nice, normal people that deserve to have love in their lives. What's to argue about? Right. And I see there's so many parallels with the shared parenting movement. Everybody knows a divorced or single parent, and almost all of them are good people that should have access to their kids. So there's so many opportunities and examples to justify the reason this focus should be a positive one of love. And it's easy because who doesn't love kids?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the moment of pivot that you just mentioned, uh, sometimes you don't know exactly when it happens. But I have to think that we're close because there are almost no major issues in the country where the polling is even close to what we're talking about in shared parenting. We're seeing polling where state after state, it's in excess of 80% now or more of people who
Mm.
support shared parenting. How many other issues are there where you're reaching a national consensus on a topic? There's too much water behind the dam, and it has to give. And we're on the edge of a waterfall of shared parenting laws.
I have felt like that. I have definitely felt like that and have agreed and said similar things. However, we are not getting any work done. We're not getting through committee hearings. we are not getting it's I have a project that's out right now. I did this big survey about single moms and income, putting a mainstream feminist spin on this issue or a perspective on this issue. It's hard to get media placement. Just reporters come back, they're like, yeah, but what about domestic violence, right? These old pushbacks that we have a lot of really powerful data to overcome are still coming up front and center in this issue. So
Mhm.
I have mixed feelings about whether that's going to be true.
Yeah, well, I mean, we don't know exactly when it is that we're going to see the flurry of laws pass. But we know that there's more and more activity. I do think that COVID kind of slowed things down last year and
Hmm.
this year. I think that that's happened, but we see in the polling that every year as we do more polling, that it gets stronger and stronger, and it just becomes difficult to hold it back. Now, that being said, Emma, one of the strengths that you've brought to the movement, and one of the ways that you've helped me, is you've talked a lot about culture. You've said, yes, we need to change laws, but we also need to change culture. And I think that as people such as yourself that have a good media microphone, that you're out there spreading the word, that it's going to help make a difference. And I also think that as more judges and lawmakers are a little younger, that I think that will help. And another thing we can do is celebrate shared parenting when it happens. Talk about the parents who get it.
Yes.
Talk about the parents who get it. Talk about how successful they are. Here in Kentucky, we've highlighted Will Chen and Jordan Piles and Rob Holdsworth and some other parents who've won. And another thing we can do is in 2019, Kentucky made another step, and we became the first state to have Shared Parenting Day. The governor of Kentucky
Hmm.
proclaimed April 26th Shared Parenting Day, and April 26th is important because that's the day the nation's first shared parenting presumption law was signed into law. And it's also the day after Parental Alienation Day. So you have, sort of the morning of Shared Parenting Day after the night of Parental Alienation Day. And I often try to more and more try to wear yellow or sort of a gold color, because that's kind of the color of family reunions, and that's the color that I chose for Shared Parenting Day.
Okay. Okay, cool. But let's just talk a little bit about the culture, because I don't people might not 100% get what we're saying. There's that is really where I feel like I can be of service, because I do have a media business and expertise, and to be focused on that culture, because I don't have a policy background, right? I think that's always a knee jerk thing. The system is broken. Let's fix the system. But the system and culture are always dynamically intertwined. I don't care what you're talking about. We're talking about gay marriage. I don't really care what it is, what the policy is. There has to be some measure of popular support to support it, because that we can't have the policy going ahead of our culture, because it will fail, and that will be horrible for our movement. So we
You're
need
right.
to get the culture. And so what does that look like? And you mentioned, my phone is binging, I am turning this off. Parents who win at a custody battle. In my work, honestly, to your point about the culture catching up so quickly, I was just on Instagram today. There are the hashtags co-parenting success, co-parenting goals. Somebody has a Instagram following, it's like co-parenting lab or something. And it was like 100,000 followers, so robust. It's a hashtag. It is
Right.
absolutely out there. It's a cool thing. And then there's celebrities that are like, cute, hot, young, sports stars and their sexy model girlfriends, and they're like hashtag co-parenting at the sideline of the Knicks game or whatever. And it is becoming just an organic thing. And I think and then this is part of my own personal reference, like when I was going through divorce, it's such a trauma. You're married or you're not married, you had that breakup, and you just default to what you default to what you saw your parents doing, you default to what your best friend is urging you to do, or what you've maybe not even thought about consciously, this is how you do it. And I think that's true for parenting overall. It's so overwhelming, you just default to what because the stakes seem so high. And if we can change what people default to, If we can just make it so it's an organic thing, that you go to the mommy group in your neighborhood where you all sit out, like I used to sit out in the blankets in the park and nurse my babies with the other mommies, and it's just equally shared parenting is the norm.
Mhm.
That is really worth it. It doesn't really, if we had that, really even wouldn't matter what the laws were, if everybody was doing it, because the public pressure and the new norm would be so powerful. That's really where the change would
And
happen.
the way we change culture is doing what you're doing, and that is you're going out and you're talking to people, you're educating people, and you're spreading the word. And people such as myself that are a little bit more involved in the law part of it, we can change things, but as you said, culture has to be there, or else the building will fall over. And
Hmm.
you've made good progress with yourself, and you're also making it more comfortable for a lot of women to reach out and become comfortable with shared parenting. And
Hmm.
another thing to remember about culture, Emma, is that lawmakers are part of that culture. They don't live in a bubble. When they leave the state capitol, they go home. They go to their jobs or home. In Kentucky, we have part-time lawmakers, so they go to a different job, and they're immersed in the culture of where they are. And when they start seeing successful shared parenting families in their personal lives, that will encourage them to vote for shared parenting laws in
Hmm.
their professional lawmaking.
Yeah, it's true. Their knee-jerk reaction is going to be like, "Oh, well, that wouldn't work for my sister, so now get out of my office." Or, "Oh, yeah, yeah, that's they're human. They're very human, right?" Which goes back to why it's so important to think about very thoughtfully about who is approaching the lawmaker and how they're approaching it. One more thing I will say about that is that, and I'll say this, speak from my own personal experience. So my main business is a content site and media platform, Wealthy Single Mommy. So I have like hundreds of thousands of women I'm interacting with every year, single moms or people thinking about becoming single moms, and they're reaching out. They want help, they want advice, they want support, they want someone to listen to them. And the ones that start their narrative with how their ex did them wrong, I'm just like, there's another side of that story. There's two sides, there's three sides to every story, and I don't automatically believe you.
Yeah, it's tough. People don't live in a, we're talking about the lawmakers. They don't live in a bubble. People don't live in a bubble, and they need to realize that they have to co-parent with somebody. It's like having a job. You have to work well with the people at your daytime job. Well, in the evening when you go home and you parent, you gotta work well with that coworker too. And we have to have a situation where we start encouraging people as friends to not fight tooth and nail through a divorce or separation. We need to help them be reasonable, and that doesn't always mean taking sides between mom and dad, because sometimes taking a side with mom or dad means taking a side against the child. So as a friend to people going through difficulties, we need to encourage them to work well with the other parent and not try to win.
And that absolutely works. And what I'm hearing you say though is that every single person can be a powerful activist
Mhm.
in their own personal life, whether that means walking the talk. And I'm really speaking to the women at this point, right? If you really believe in equality, you have to think about how you parent and co-parent. But I mean, I talk about this all day long to anybody that will listen, in my professional life and my personal life. And I have a number of personal girlfriends who will tell me that I changed their tune. They grew up assuming the divorce paradigm, the mom gets the kids and alimony, and I changed. I took a lot of work, but I changed their tune. And then they start pushing back on other people. I've heard different stories. My girlfriend, Betsy, her sister's going through divorce, and she's on her sister's butt all the time because her sister's all about the alimony. The sister's all about picking the fights, and it is real activism that changes. Another girlfriend of mine, she just said her friend going through a divorce and fighting for primary custody, and she's like, look, he's a great guy. Why are you fighting? Go for 50-50. And the divorcing friend said, you know what, you're the only person in my life who has said that.
Wow.
And they
I
did
mean,
it, and they did 50-50, and that was a couple of years ago, and everybody's doing okay.
making a difference one person at a time.
It is one person at a time. And it's not just people, you're working in the policy, I'm a loudmouth in the media. but every single person watching this can be a super powerful activist in changing a family, changing a mind, changing a culture. And then that ripples out. If everybody on the playground is casually chatting about their 50-50 schedule, we've just changed the world.
Right, right. And as when you go through child custody and you don't fight so nasty and hard during the separation, it does make things easier down the road. It will make your life easier down the road if you don't fight the other parent for 50-50.
Well, that's right. That's right. It's setting that precedence. It's not just the legal thing, but it is just setting the initial, you have said it the best. I forget what you said, but it's just the precedence is important. And it does, because I'm telling you, I did not have a great start to my divorce. And I still think about, I'm like, that beep, 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 beep. It's like 12 years ago and I'm still bitter about it. Like, that doesn't serve anybody.
Well, yeah, I mean but look at what you've done. I talked about turning, anger into energy, frustration into energy, and look what you're doing. And I'm not hearing an angry person now. I'm hearing someone who's looking for good in other people and encouraging good in other people's lives.
Right.
And
It
I
can be done.
understand
It's hard.
I'm sure. Yeah, it is for everybody. And I can tell you one thing, and this is for me and some people that I know, and that is, I'm a person of faith, and I find that if you pray for the other person, if you try to pray your anger away, that will help you. Now, a lot of times at first it feels fake, very fake, but over time it does make a difference. And I want to say one other thing when you were talking about changing culture, and changing culture is something that you're doing in a different way that you haven't even mentioned, Emma, and something I believe I'm doing too, and that is we're changing it through our children. We are showing our children that shared parenting works, and we're showing our children so that the next generation will have a natural built-in constituency for supporting shared parenting laws.
Oh, I have created memes about that. I mean, I really think I see it already with people our age and young parents. They look back on their parents' divorces and they're like, what the hell? I think about it like we think about our grandparents, like not my grandmother, but many of like they were all smoking and drinking in the 40s and 50s all through their pregnancies. And that's what people did. And it was like corrupt advertising. It was bad. And we're like, what the
Right.
That you're horrible, and our children will be judging us so I really do believe that shame can be a useful tool in this movement. It is like, are you going to be proud of yourself in 20 years when your because statistically our kids are not going to look like Ward and June Cleaver. They're going to have some alternative blended family structure. Like, there is no turning this family, separated family tide. I mean, that they are going to have non-traditional families.
I believe the majority of children now are born outside of marriage.
They absolutely are. So our kids are going to look something like our blended families. And are they going to be fighting each other in court for 20% time and alimony and all this baloney? They are not. They are not. And they're going to be judging us. So how are you proud of yourself today?
I think it's interesting is the most recent batch of polls that we did showed that it had a question that I did not write, and I wish I could take credit for, but it said, do you think that single custody, sole custody, increases conflict in divorce and separation? And a large, overwhelming number of people said that yes, it does. Mm-hmm. And that just shows that in a lot of ways, the average person on the street, the average citizen is way out in front of our laws. And they understand that, we need to decrease conflict among parents. And the way to do that is to start off with an expectation of working together and having equal time.
Mm-hmm. It's just equal. It's so easy. It is such a simple concept. 50-50, don't go to court, or maybe hire a mediator to work out a few snags, and it's just 50-50. It's just 50-50. Pay your own rent. It's not complicated.
Yeah, simple.
It is. This is the future. So I just want to get a few more details before I cut you loose here about it. So first of all, I want to establish, what's your day job? Like, you're not a lobbyist, or you're not like somebody that was like born into some political family. Like, you're a guy.
Yeah. Yeah. Still.
You still got your tie on, so it must be
Yeah,
true.
here I am.
So who are you? Like, what's your job and what's your background,
Well,
professional background?
I couldn't be further from all of the things that you would expect. I mean, I was raised by a single mom. I sell construction products. I have
Yeah.
50-50. I'm not sure that I even fit the issues related to gender very well because I have 3 daughters. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes people say, "Oh, I'm doing it because I don't want my sons to have to go through this." Well, I don't want my daughters to have to go through this either. But so yeah, I have 3 daughters, one of whom's adopted, and I'm remarried, and I have 2 stepsons who are just wonderful young men who were raised in a shared parenting situation. So it's it's just kind of a funny thing. It felt to me, Emma, like this kind of fell in my lap, like I was supposed to do it.
I
And
feel the same way. I feel very called to do this work too. And I'm still figuring out where I'm most useful, but I just can't stop. I'm just doing stuff with
you
it.
can't stop,
But
you're addicted.
but so you don't. So you were just a guy that had no actual specific success, and it took you a few years of failure. Give us a few takeaways. What were some of the lessons that you learned from those failures, and how did you turn those around into a success?
Uh, well, I mean, one of the first things was that sometimes trying to get a large group of people together to do something isn't as successful as just having a small group of people who are coming from the right place and have the right message. I think
Okay.
that's one part. Another one is you have to keep the anger out of the movement. You can't do that. It doesn't help. It just reinforces stereotypes. It turns lawmakers off. Another thing I would say is that you can't give up because you will fail many times. And another lesson that I have, and this is particularly for the dads in the movement, is that you can't focus so much on gender. You can't talk so much about men are getting screwed over and
Yeah.
men this and men that and dads this. I mean, look, I understand that there are plenty of men and dads out there who have been discriminated against. I
Mm-hmm.
understand that. There are also women that are getting discriminated against. And it doesn't matter what the source of the discrimination is on either side. It doesn't even in some ways matter that there's discrimination at all, because what we're really focused on is what's best for kids. And part of the messaging that I learned is to stop talking so much about the parents and start talking more about the kids.
Mm-hmm.
That was an important thing. And then another was uh, in 2015, when I was absolutely at the bottom. I was hopeless. I had really given up. And I thought to myself, okay, I'm just going to quit. And one day I was just here and again in the same office, and I was like, somebody has to be willing to help me, and I looked
Yeah.
online and I looked for someone who had some research on it. And I happened to find Dr. Ryan Schroeder, who was the chair of the sociology department at the University of Louisville. I found him and I sent him an email. And he and I met out for coffee a week later. He wasn't familiar with shared parenting movement, and he was surprised that I approached him, but he was an expert in the root causes of juvenile delinquency.
Mm.
And his expertise and his research played well into this. And when we talked about it, he said, look, you can't be a successful parent if you can't be an authoritative parent. And you can't be an authoritative parent if you don't have enough time in the child's life, if you're a Disney mom or a Disney dad. And talking with Ryan, it helped educate me. And then it gave me power and confidence to go out and talk to the lawmakers and say, look, I can tell you my firsthand personal experience how well shared parenting works. And he can tell you all about the stats of how well it works in society. And that was a very powerful message that the lawmakers, that they agreed to.
So quick question, what kind of opposition did you get and what did that look like?
Well, opposition came in a lot of forms. um, there were people who, shared parenting activists, who were very critical of me, heavily critical of me for initially not going after the full-blown shared parenting law presumption, starting with temporary orders. People said, what a waste of time. Good grief, you're going to go and you're going to spend all this effort to get temporary orders passed? Who cares? And I think that the path that followed proved that that strategy works. So, and there's been more. You'd be surprised how much criticism I've received from shared parenting activists.
Well, we could spend another 2 hours on that, I'm sure. But
Or
you,
people who would call me up a day or two before the hearing and say, I want to testify, put me in front of the cameras. And I'm like, have we met? You know, the lawmakers don't know who you are. You're out of state, you know. I'm not, maybe I don't. And so I think there was some of that people were trying to use Kentucky's success for themselves. And then when they didn't get it, then they criticized the Kentucky heroes and myself. But either way, I don't want to be negative.
It's humility. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm always calling on my work. I'm always asking for humility, right? As a guiding force, because then I think your story is exactly right. You needed help. If you're just like plowing through and like, you know, you said you were at a rock bottom, you could have quit. You could have kept on your failing course and kept repeating your failures, but you had to humble yourself and know what you didn't know. And all of a sudden it opened up yourself to this new relationship, and it ended up being a winning strategy that you maybe didn't even envision yourself. And that's the thing. It's like, people know how to pass bills. It happens every day in this country. It is a formula. And there's lots of different ways to do it, but there is a formula for it. So let's learn from other causes. It could be anything. It could be in the agriculture industry. It could be about gun control. It could be about, you know, construction zoning. I don't know. There's just ways to get stuff done in local courts, and let's go to those people and get the best practices and learn.
Right.
And step away from being the general. We don't need 100 generals. I estimate there's about 300 shared parenting organizations in this country. We maybe need 2 to 0.
Well, it is a very fractured movement. And, you know, it's interesting that, you know, over time, you know, there are some groups that have had some success. But, you know, I'm always thankful for just the individuals who get involved. You know, I mentioned it before, you know, heroes, particularly Kentucky heroes, but people who not only do they turn their their anger into energy, but they also have a level of risk, because when you're talking about someone who goes out and talks to their lawmakers or maybe writes a letter to the editor for their newspapers, they're putting themselves out there, and they take the risk of angering the other parent, or angering a judge who's looking at their case, or angering the other party's attorney. And that takes a lot of courage. And that's another reason why people need to do it from a place of love. Because if you're going to put yourself out there, you can't be out there burning down buildings. You've got to be out there talking about how this is good for everybody. And that includes the other party in your own case.
Right. And the internet is it's a hugely powerful thing, period, in this movement. And every comment, every meme, every new group that started on Facebook is a stitch in this larger goal that we have together. And
right.
it matters. And when somebody Googles, you know, if you're a leading voice in this movement, somebody Googles your name and a bill's about to come up, and there is a police report, and you have a 5,000 word soliloquy about how rotten your ex is. Mm-hmm. That is not a small thing. That is a huge thing that affects this entire movement and all the people that it represents. So, and you know, I don't know, that's where I go down the rabbit hole, because communication, just because you have access to Twitter, just because you have a mouth, doesn't make you a good communicator. This is something that people spend their careers, their lifetimes honing: messaging, communications, you know, communicating with legislators, policy work. I mean, this is a very, very high art that many people can learn. You don't need a PhD to do it. You don't need, but it does take an enormous amount of finesse and practice to do it well. And when it's done poorly, it can be detrimental.
You know, and you're right. And there is videotape of say the testimony that Dr. Schroeder and I gave. You can go to YouTube, National Parents Organization, and see it. And I believe, Emma, are you putting some of yours out there?
Yeah, it's out there. Yeah, it is on my site and stuff. Yes.
I think that's important for people to see you know, a normal everyday, a guy who sells construction products in Kentucky. Here he is, and it looks so intimidating, and it is. I mean, the first time I testified, Emma, I was so nervous. When I was done, I barely remember what I said. I probably looked like the biggest clown ever. But by the time I'd done it multiple times, it became very comfortable for me. And you know, I've testified not outside of Kentucky. I've testified in Pennsylvania, in West Virginia, and you know, and I've also been trying to help other states by writing columns and things like that too.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually, you can learn a skill of testifying and talking to lawmakers. And I would encourage you to, you know, watch your, you know, I would encourage
Well,
people
ask for
to watch your
help.
videos.
I've extended, I mean, I have done in my life media training. I mean, some of my colleagues, they train corporate 500, you know, 50 CEOs to speak in the media. I mean, this is what I do for work. And if I have a big project I'm working on, I hire a consultant to help me prepare for it. Right. And I'm a professional. This is what I do for a living. And it is, and I'm just saying, anyone watching this and you have something coming up, I will spend an hour of my time for free with you to help you just practice it. And people make remarkable progress in an hour. You can get a lot of work done, but you really do need to be working with somebody that knows what they're doing I will tear you down and build you back up again.
Wow, maybe I need to call you again and get some pointers.
Yeah, we can do it. I mean, I use it. I do that to myself. I work with people I trust and I pay them, you know, to work with me about, anyways. So, okay, question. So typically there's always the standard issue pushback. It's the bars associations and the domestic violence advocates in every state, every time these bills come up. Did you face those? How did you contend with that?
Well, I think by taking the incremental step first, that we lessened the, you know, the parties opposing this, in particular the Bar Association. When you make a very small step in temporary orders, they didn't feel threatened by that, and therefore there wasn't a whole lot of pushback in that way. Kentucky's lawmakers have a lower than average percentage of lawyers in the state house. So I think that was part of it, the lawmakers. I think with the domestic violence people, you know, we tried to talk to them and sometimes and approach them when we could, and you know, say, look, we should be natural allies. What we're trying to do is make parents not fight, you know, for one to be a winner and one to be a loser, and you're trying not to make parents fight in a different way. So we're on the same team. And, you know, again, when we talk about the message of love, that isn't just for individuals that are not involved in organizations. That's also for individuals and organizations. A lot of people in the domestic violence groups have suffered some pretty rough things, and they've had some hard times, and it's a little harder to overcome, you know, understanding that look, it can work for parents, and to understand, or to help them understand, that people who are in a situation where they can get along should be encouraged to get along. But that being said, you know, we always want to support shared parenting for people who are fit. And if there's a parent out there who is not fit, who really is a dangerous person, a violent person, then shared parenting should not apply to that person. And Kentucky's law, and basically almost every other law I've seen, has an exception for domestic violence, and it should.
And it should. And that is, so I just was recently, large business organization, news organization, just wrote a nice art. It ended up being a very nice article about some work that I've been doing. But in the editing process, they sent me this email and they're like, yeah, but it doesn't it promote domestic violence? Because I had cited Kentucky, and they said, well, and I was like, oh, well, actually, no, because and I was able to cite the language of your law to help, you know, educate people, right? It is, people are coming at this from love, right? We all care about domestic violence. Absolutely, we care about it. So if we can be showing how this law supports domestic violence victims, prevents domestic violence, again, a message of love. I mean, if I came back and said, that is so stupid, don't you know anything? That is just a myth.
Right.
It's just a feminist perpetuating myth, and my article probably would never have been published.
Right. No, I think you're doing it the right way, a positive message. And Kentucky's law
And
has
facts, and relying and pointing specifically. This is what the law says. Here are the positive results for domestic violence in Kentucky. You can't argue with facts. I mean, can. Who am I kidding?
well,
Was I asleep the last 4 years? Of course you can. But but it really is being thoughtful about how you're responding to things that might get your blood pressure up.
Kentucky's law uses the word finding. That there has to be a finding of domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's an exception that if there's a finding that a parent doesn't qualify if there's been a finding of domestic violence. So you have that on the sort of punishment side in Kentucky's law, but you also have an encouragement in Kentucky's law called the friendly parent factor. It's for all you policy wonks, it's 403-270 factor K. And when I wrote the first draft of Kentucky's shared parenting law, I lifted that. I stole that word for word from Arizona, which was, I believe, the first state to have the friendly parent factor. And it's in Kentucky's law, and that encourages people to behave well. And that doesn't have to just be at the high level of domestic violence. That can be at the lower levels of smaller aggressions, inconsiderations, lots of different things. And the friendly parent factor encourages parents to get along well. It's a consideration that judges can use in shared parenting.
Right. And then it's shining the entire effort in a positive light. You're like, we don't want just what's fair for men. We want people to go along and do the right thing on behalf of their kids and on behalf of everyone else. So one more thing that I think contributes to your success. I mean, there's probably many things. A couple of things. One is that you just focus on one single thing: shared parenting. You didn't get distracted with child support reform. You didn't get distracted with alimony reform. You don't talk about parental alienation. You did one thing and you did it really well and you won.
Well, thank you, Emma. I appreciate that. It is easier when you're focused on things. I do talk to people about some of the issues, that are related to parental alienation and child support, and it is a little bit of a complicated web of different topics, and I think those things all matter. But for lawmaking, if we can get that presumption of, that there's a presumption that it's in a child's best interest to have equal time with both parents if the parents are fit. If we can get that into laws across the state, a lot of the other problems will begin to go away. Doesn't mean entirely, but it will definitely help. And I want to say one other thing when we're talking about other states. You mentioned earlier, 300 different organizations. I want to say, I've been encouraging people out there that are watching your show to keep going, to keep working. And that's not just individuals alone. It's also that are working in all these wonderful state level groups. So many people are stepping out of their lives and working in small groups from Alaska to Florida, and they're doing great. They're doing great work, and they're changing culture and hopefully laws in their own way. And I think that's one of the things I want to say to everyone is I hope that you can learn that Kentucky's law didn't happen in a vacuum and it didn't happen magically. There were years of failure. And for those of you who are out there working, keep going, keep doing the good work. You're doing everything you can, and just stay happy and focused, and don't be angry. Even if you feel it, don't show it.
You can show it privately to your therapist.
Right. Maybe
you gotta work it. You gotta work through it. You gotta work it all out.
Right. Yeah. Hit the weights.
All right. I'm leaving you with gratitude. Thank you so much for your time today and for your continued work, and just for sharing what you learned, because we're all just trying to figure out and learn from each other. It's so important.
Well, and Emma, I just want to thank you too. I mean, everything you're doing, you were kind enough to send me a copy of a book, and I'm not always the biggest reader, but I am working on reading your book.
Honestly, it's super pink and it's for single moms, and so I thought you would just want to give it to some moms that you know.
And it's certainly, you have some alternative views on things that some women might find a little surprising. One of the things I'm going to do is read your chapter about why you shouldn't accept alimony.
Oh yeah, spread that around.
I need to read that one because I'm sure that's going to be a very interesting one.
Yeah, I have a whole blog post on that, and it is provocative for people, but it's, again, we're changing the culture.
Mhm.
We are changing the culture, and we cannot be perpetuating this idea. I mean, like, I am like right in the middle of mainstream feminism. I am talking to you from my apartment in New York City with my Biden Harris stuff. You know, my kids and I can't be, I mean, I'm like card carrying cliche. And, but that is a pickle because a lot of my colleagues in that movement are still defaulting to these old sexist paradigms. And I'm like, sorry, you can't, we cannot have equality if we tell women the best that they can do is to be living off of some man's money and we're not even sleeping with him anymore.
You're right. And the points that you made about, the old politics and things like that, they don't work in shared parenting. I mean, look what we're talking about. When Kentucky's law passed, it was nearly unanimous from both Democrats and Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
And when it passed, both parties tweeted out success, proudly about its success. I mean, how often does that happen on a major issue?
It's very
And look at
special.
what we're talking about here. We've got a woman in New York City who's a mainstream feminist is what you called yourself, talking about the benefits of shared parenting with a guy who sells construction products in Kentucky. I mean, that's the conversation we're having, and that shows the range that shared parenting supporters have.
No, it is. It's by, but the other part, I know I mentioned this before, but I think we really, as a movement, we need to be focusing, we need to be highlighting the fact that this is policy that has so many benefits and it does not cost any money. That's usually the hang up, right? Is it like, where's the budget for subsidized childcare? Where's the budget to reform education? How are we going to do that? No, cost zero. It is immediate savings to the court system, immediate savings to families. It's a no-brainer.
Right. And when you saw here, when Kentucky passed the first law, that the conflicted cases went down. So the courts had fewer cases
That's
in
right.
front of them to fight through. We had the Judge Lucinda Masterton, who's the head of the Child Support Commission. She's in one of the minutes of one of the meetings saying it's a lot easier to settle cases now that we have shared parenting in Kentucky. You have judges talking about it. You have lawyers talking. We talked to Carl Knuckleman, who's a lawyer in Northern Kentucky and Cincinnati. He works in both states on both sides of the river. And he said, yeah, it's a lot easier to resolve cases in Kentucky now than it is in Ohio because Kentucky has shared parenting.
And I'll tell you a personal anecdote for the families. I had spent a summer in Lexington with my boyfriend a few years ago, and I had made a girlfriend there, and she was going through a divorce. It was 2017 when you were in the temporary orders, and she was just, as we all did, call around for the free advice to the lawyers.
Yep.
And she said everybody, and she didn't have a lot of money, and she's like, everybody was just like, yeah, it's 50-50. It's going to be 50-50. So you just might as well do 50-50. And it was not easy. They were about to, hurt each other. They were not physically, but it was not an easy situation. Right. And she's like, well, that's what it is, 50-50. I think they paid a lawyer $1,000 just to go over their paperwork and it was done. And now they're doing 50-50 and they're totally fine. It's all good. And boom, culture has just changed like that.
Culture's changed and behavior is often based on expectations. And when people go into a divorce expecting to be 50-50 and they're encouraged by the law through something like a friendly parent factor, they're going to embrace 50-50 and get more comfortable with it. And in those cases where people don't qualify or don't fit, there are also exceptions. In Kentucky's law, there are 11 exceptions for bad behavior. So if things are really over the top, there is protection for children.
And again, emphasizing that those 11 items are very helpful when the rest of us are out here doing the field work. And we can point to those as to the naysayers.
Absolutely.
All right. So before we bore people to tears, I'm going to wrap this up. Matt Hale, Kentucky activist, giving you giant applause on behalf of children for future generations to come for getting the Kentucky equally shared parenting passed into law. So thank you for your good work.
Well, thank you very much, Emma, and thank you for everything you're doing. Your amazing platform, the writing you do, and I'm personally very excited to see that you're now getting involved in testifying and appearing before the states, and that's a great step for our movement. And thank you for that.
Well, thank you.